Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyau Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantif Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapasshantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
Our song this morning is on page 48 in the books under the sea in Kanju.
Free.
Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Our subject today is the art of knowing. All of us are continually engaged in the practice of acquiring knowledge, but the process in most people is often very unconscious. We don't always do this well, this acquiring of knowledge. In fact, we do it quite haphazardly most of the time, which is why many of us know a lot of things, but that knowledge doesn't seem to do us a lot of good. It does us some good, not a whole lot good. We don't practice knowledge as an art. We haven't yet become experts at getting knowledge. Hence the importance of learning the art of acquiring knowledge. So first of all, we really need to recognize that the desire to know is inbuilt in us. We seem forever hungry for knowledge. Our seeking after knowledge begins soon after our birth. We can see it in the eyes of the baby when she scans the world and the people around her. We can see it in the way a child turns the pages of a book. Or of course, nowadays, more swiping pictures on a smartphone or a tablet. We can see when cooks experiment with new recipes, students pore over library books, those students who do go to the libraries, and people who browse through newspapers in coffee shops, the elderly swapping stories in retirement homes, and reporters covering events for the media. We can see it when people are at work or on vacation, when they are at their desk or on their hike, or when they are conversing with friends or ruminating in solitude, in all of these. And this is hardly, these are just a few examples when we are continually, consciously or unconsciously acquiring knowledge. No matter where we are and no matter what we are doing, we are always trying to know something or the other. The only difference is, as I said, some people do it consciously and some people do it unconsciously. In some, the desire to know is intense, and in others it is muted, but the hunger for knowledge is kind of inbuilt in us right from the time we are born. Now, we wouldn't feel the need to know something if we already knew it. Our quest for knowledge is an admission of our lack of knowledge. Our desire to know springs from our ignorance. More specifically, the knowledge of our ignorance. If we don't know that we don't know, then we wouldn't want to know anything. So first we need to know that we don't know in order for us to want to know. Sounds like a good tongue twister. When we know something, our ignorance regarding it is dispelled. It's like when a room is lighted, the darkness in that room is dispelled. Which is why when we get knowledge, any knowledge, it always brings joy. You can see it, something you don't know, and then once you know it, your face lights up. There is some satisfaction, some joy inside. It also brings fulfillment of sorts. No knowledge that we have so far has brought us total fulfillment. By total fulfillment, I mean that you feel that, oh, I'm satisfied. I mean, it's like this. It's like a good meal. When you have a nice, hearty meal, it brings you fulfillment. You said, I can't take anything more. I'm full, you say. But you don't, that's not like, you don't say that all through life. After 8 hours or by next day, you're hungry again. So a good meal brings fulfillment, but it's still temporary. Similarly, the knowledge that we have, the different kinds of knowledge that we have, it all brings fulfillment, but it's of a limited nature. Even when we know something, we also realize somewhere that there is a whole lot of things we don't know. So one of the ancient Upanishads, called the Mundaka Upanishad, tells the story of a student named Shaunaka, who approached his teacher, Angirasa, and asked this question. He says, "Tell me, master, what is that knowing which everything becomes known?" So that is a good starting point in our reflection on knowledge. It's one of the very oft-quoted passages from the Upanishads. In Sanskrit, it goes like this: Vijñātāram are kena vijaniyat. That is the question that comes later on in the Upanishad. It begins with this question: Kasminnu bhagavo vijñāte sarvamidam vijñātam bhavati. What is that knowing which everything becomes known? Now we would say, why would anyone want to know that? One thing by which everything becomes known. Shaunaka, this student here, like many of us, had realized that this universe is just too big. There are just too many things to know. And he was hungry for knowledge. And he realized that his time was limited, his energy was limited, and it's just not possible to know every little thing. So he just wanted to know, wouldn't it be great if there is one thing knowing which I would know everything? And we know that sometimes if you have a big home or have to juggle a lot of keys, then we feel it will be good to have one master key by which all the locks in your home can be opened. Or nowadays, since people sign up for so many things and everything online needs a password, and we are often advised, don't use the same password everywhere. And then the problem is, well, if I have many different passwords for the different places I sign up on, how am I going to remember it? And then wouldn't it be great to have one master password by which I can unlock any of the sites? And in fact, nowadays there are apps available by which you need to remember only one password. Then you have access to everything. So it's kind of understandable why one would say, is there one knowledge that I can have by which everything will become known? So when we begin to think deeply about knowledge, we quickly realize that there are different kinds of knowledge, and there are various ways of classifying knowledge. A whole lot of information about the world comes to us through the senses. In fact, all of the information that we have now comes to us through the five, they're called the senses of knowledge, jnana indriya in Sanskrit. Really, all the visuals, the form, the color, it comes to the sense of perception. All the sounds through hearing, smell, taste, touch. I mean, that's basically our knowledge of the world coming to us through the five senses that we have and the mind. So it's always from out there that knowledge seems to come. And our senses bring us the, in technical language you say sensory data or information from outside, and then that gives us knowledge of the external world. Now, since this knowledge concerns objects of the world, both living and non-living, this knowledge is called objective knowledge because it's knowledge concerning the objects. Now, most of us, we can spend our entire lives gathering objective knowledge about things and people outside of us. And most of the people, when we speak about knowledge, that's all that people mean. Getting to know the world around, getting to know people and things around. The more I know about it, the more knowledgeable I am. So that's the only knowledge most people think is knowledge. But a few people turn their gaze inward in order to find not just what's out there, but what's in here. So instead of asking questions about what's out there, they begin to ask questions about themselves. Who is this person asking questions about the world? Who is this person seeking knowledge? Since this inquiry is directed not outward, but inward, not towards the object of perception, but toward the subject who is trying to perceive. So this knowledge, therefore, is called subjective knowledge. So knowledge of the subject as opposed to, or as contrasted from, knowledge about the objects. Now, one other way of classifying knowledge is by distinguishing between what is sometimes called direct knowledge and indirect knowledge. The knowledge that is filtered through the mind and the senses is indirect knowledge. It's filtered. It's not knowledge as it is. And we know, as I said in the beginning, all of the knowledge that we get now is filtered through our mind and the senses. If I shut my eyes, all visual knowledge is shut off. If I close my ears, all audible knowledge, auditory knowledge, whatever, all knowledge comes through sound, in the form of sound, is shut out. So all the knowledge that is filtered through the senses, and it actually, you think about it, it is really filtered. We don't really get to know what's out there. We get to know only what our senses can grasp. And we know. And an example that I often like to give, because it's kind of very obvious. Even say, let's our sense of smell, for instance. We don't get all the smells that are out there. A dog gets a lot more knowledge and information about the smells than we do. So our knowledge about the different kind of smells out there is limited by our capacity, the human capacity to smell. Similarly, even sound. It's not that all different frequencies and vibrations of sound that we see, even visuals. So our senses are limited, and only what our senses can perceive, we see. So the world that we see through our senses, even if our senses are in perfectly working condition, it's still not the entire world. It's still a very limited world that we see and perceive through our senses. So this knowledge, which is filtered through the senses, is indirect. The Sanskrit word for indirect knowledge is called paroksha, as opposed to direct knowledge. A direct knowledge would mean a knowledge that is not filtered through the senses and the mind, a knowledge that does not depend on the senses and the mind. And so that is called the opposite of paroksha. In Sanskrit, it means aparoksha. So this way of classifying knowledge into direct and indirect makes all knowledge that comes from books indirect. And by books is meant all books, no exceptions. Not even books which are believed to be revealed scriptures, like the Vedas, the Quran, the Bible. If that knowledge comes from books, it is being filtered through the senses and the mind. And therefore, it is still indirect knowledge. Indirect knowledge would also include the knowledge that we get through the internet. Thank you, Google. So again, even what you learn through Google is still indirect knowledge, not direct knowledge by any means. Or the knowledge that we get from conversations with our friends or from lectures and classes. Whatever information and knowledge you might get even from the lectures we have at the Vedanta Society, that is still indirect knowledge. Now come to think about it, knowledge that we acquire through all of these sources is better described as information. Information about everything that's out there. To the extent that this information that we get helps us to think and organize the thoughts in our mind, it does produce some knowledge, no doubt about it. So an information which is processed within us becomes knowledge. But this knowledge is indirect, as I said, because it has been filtered through the senses and the mind. Unfiltered knowledge completely bypasses the mind and the senses, and hence it reveals reality as it is. It is for this reason that in Vedanta, the same Upanishad that I quoted earlier, the Upanishad which begins with the question, is there one thing knowing which I will know everything, then later goes on to classify knowledge as lower knowledge and higher knowledge. And lower knowledge is all objective knowledge. Lower knowledge is all indirect knowledge. All knowledge that comes through the mind and the senses, it calls lower knowledge. The word that is used in the Upanishads is aparavidya. As opposed to higher knowledge, paravidya. And it is a beautiful phrase in Sanskrit. It says, yaya tad aksharam adhigamyate. So what is higher knowledge? Which is the knowledge that bypasses the mind and the senses? It is that knowledge through which the imperishable is known. So all the knowledge concerning the world is a knowledge of perishable entities. It can bring us some amount of fulfillment, but never total fulfillment. It can bring us some amount of satisfaction, but it will never bring us total satisfaction. So the kind of reality we are all used to is in a constant state of flux. What we encounter around us is always a relentless change. Things last for a while, and then they change or are modified or appear in a different form. So nothing in life, living or non-living, comes without an expiry date. Everything is perishable, or so it seems, until we begin to question the accuracy of what we see. Maybe what we experience as the world is not really what is out there. Clearly, it is being filtered after all. The instruments we gather to use knowledge, the mind and the senses, they are both limited and they are both change prone. The strength and vitality of our senses changes. The strength and vitality of the mind changes. So these are change prone and these are limited. And maybe therefore it's not unreasonable to assume that something that is being filtered through a limited change prone filters will appear also as limited and change prone. This is how the world does appear to us. So the way the world appears to us may not be the world as it really is. Swami Vivekananda deals with it in his lectures on Dhyana Yoga. He says that what's out there is, if you call it by an entity X, we don't know what that X is. So what we see really is X plus the mind and the senses, mind and senses put together. So our world is really X plus the mind. And because that plus mind is my mind, so the world that I see is whatever is out there plus my mind. The world that you see is whatever is out there plus your mind. And since our minds are not exactly identical, our minds are colored by our own experiences, our own impressions, our own hopes, thoughts, fears. I mean, every mind has its own way of processing information and understanding and interpreting things, which is why we don't always see the same world. Okay, what do we mean don't always see the same world? I mean this, that for instance, I mean, if you look at the chair, and of course we all see the same chair. In a way, yes, but maybe not, because if I see the chair and I say, how beautiful chair, what a great craftsmanship, what great color. And you look at the same chair and say, oh, that's a lousy chair. I hate that chair. So I see a beautiful object and you see a terrible object. I see something useful and you see something useless. So we are apparently seeing something common, but we are really seeing also something different. And what makes that difference is that my mind is filtering what is out there, and your mind is filtering what is out there in different ways. Whatever is real, one of the basic axioms in Vedanta is that whatever is real is also eternal. So the two words in Sanskrit for real, the word is sat or satya. And eternal, the word is nitya. You don't need to remember this Sanskrit word. I'm just giving it as an additional information. So whatever is real is also eternal. So there is no such thing as a temporary reality, a changing reality. We use the word changing reality sometimes, but that's not really, we don't really mean it that way, because it's an oxymoron. If it is changing, it's not real. If it is temporary, it's not real. If it is real, it has got to be unchanging and eternal. Because if that which is not eternal is also real, then we have no right to dismiss our dreams as unreal. Then we need to take our dreams as seriously as we take this world. But we don't, we know that. We don't give the same validity, it's the same reality. We don't give the same reality status to our dreams as we do to the waking world. And what is the reason? Why do we not give our dreams the same status as the world? And I would imagine most of us will say, well, the dreams don't last. They just keep on changing. Well, this world continues, it persists. And so we are kind of admitting the fact that that which is persistent is real. That which just vanishes, it comes and disappears, may appear for a while, but it's not really real. The knowledge of the real, or what amounts to the same, the knowledge of the eternal or the unchanging, is higher unfiltered knowledge. It is not therefore simply knowledge as we understand it, it's an immersive experience. It doesn't lead so much to the knowledge of the imperishable reality to being the imperishable reality. So what we have seen is this. We have seen two ways of classifying knowledge. One is to classify knowledge as subjective and objective, and the other is to classify knowledge as direct or indirect. There is no end to knowledge, as I said, which is indirect. There are innumerable objects in the world in which we live, living and non-living, of mind-boggling varieties in size and shape and color and qualities. Science and technology deal with this knowledge of the external world. And therefore, we have these new inventions, new discoveries coming all the time. And many scientists are on record saying that there's every mystery that science unlocks, we find more doors to be opened, more doors to be unlocked. And it doesn't ever seem like there will come a time when science can say, now I know everything. Some scientists who claim that such a time will come, but many other, I would say, more thoughtful scientists are more humble, and they say that it's a continuous process, that every time we know something, we also discover something we didn't know, something we don't know. Every mystery that science reveals more mysteries that need solving. And therefore, the knowledge of the world by its very nature is incomplete. It can be endlessly stimulating, as many of us who have tried to understand the mysteries of the world know. It can be very fascinating and useful. So no thoughtful person can honestly deny that the knowledge of the world is incapable of bringing total and lasting fulfillment. At least so far it hasn't to anybody. So if the knowledge of the object has failed so far to bring that total fulfillment, it is there then that we turn to the subject. And that is how in Vedanta, the quest to know, there's a U-turn. So it's like, okay, there is a lot to know outside. but there is just too much to know. And even after knowing that, I still find myself unfulfilled. So let me then take a U-turn and try to look here, what's here, and try to know myself. Whether the knowledge of the subject, the real subject, will bring me that great fulfillment. And what these thinkers and practitioners have found, and this is something they discovered, that same student who asked the question, is there one thing knowing which everything will become known, got this answer from his teacher first, and then from his practice, he discovered it in his own heart, that there is only one thing knowing which everything will be known, and that is the knowledge of who I am, who I really am. And then, of course, it goes, we know where this inquiry takes us. Inquiry takes us into asking, who am I really? Because then, the moment I try to understand the subject, then I begin to inquire into who I am. And then I look, and of course, the first thing we see when you look is the body. And basically, that's who most of us think we are. And which is why everyone has a mirror at home. Because you look in the mirror and then you see, well, if what you see in the mirror is beautiful, you think you're beautiful. If someone in the mirror is short, you think you're short. And so exactly what we see in the mirror, we think that's who we are. So clearly, the first thing that we see is the body. But this is something we have gone over many times earlier, that we are not just the body, that there is also the mind, the ego, and so on. One thing we discover, and it is this. Now, remember, we are trying to get knowledge of the subject, and I try to think about the subject, and the first thing I see is the body. What is key here is I see the body. The body becomes the object of my perception. If the body is the object of my perception, it's no different from this chair being an object of my perception, that tree being an object of my perception. And if the tree being an object of my perception is out there, then why this body, which is also an object of my perception, is be considered in here? The body is as much out there, perhaps closer than the tree is, but still, if it were me, this is important, if it were me, I wouldn't be able to see myself. You see, the interesting thing is this. How sometimes the same evidence can be used to put forward two competing claims. Most of us would say, and at least the material sciences would say, what's the proof that something exists? And then say, well, because I see it. It's there. And in Vedanta, and especially in Shankara's commentaries on the Upanishads, he gives the same reason. Why is it that I can question the existence of something? Because I see it. The reason is the moment I see something, then it's an object of my perception. The only thing we can be sure about is the subject. The object may not really be the way it is, first of all, and which is very clear. We already said that the object that we see is in fact colored or distorted by the instruments through which we see the object. Plus, we see dreams as well. In the dream world, the dreams are objects of our perception. The dream world is the object of our perception, and we see it, but just because we see it, it's not really real. And so the argument that something is real just because I perceive it is not really very consistent. And so in Vedanta, they just say, if I see something, look about it this way. Can we really, I mean, even from a Vedantic standpoint, we can never see ourselves. When you look in a mirror, what you see is the body. But you say, well, I'm not the body. It's like this. No matter how strong a person is, no person, however strong, can lift himself or herself. You can lift any object, but you cannot lift yourself. Even if looking upon yourself as the body, even if I am the body, I cannot lift myself. So in other words, the subject can never become the object. And if anything can be made into an object, then it was never a subject to begin with. So the body is an object of my perception, it's not the subject. The mind is an object of my perception. If the mind were not an object of my perception, I would not be able to know, oh, I'm happy or I'm miserable. So I wouldn't be able to objectify the states of the mind, the experience of the mind, if it were not an object. In this way, in Vedanta, they keep on in their inquiry into who I really am. Everything that can be objectified is eliminated, because that's an object, because we are trying to go to the subject. And then when you reach the true subject, when everything that can be eliminated is eliminated, what remains is the true subject. Sri Ramakrishna used to give a very good illustration to prove this point. He said that there's one villager who was very eager to meet the king and had never been to the capital of the kingdom. So once he goes to the palace and wants to meet the king, and then he enters the palace gate, and of course in the palace, even the people who are there at the gate, the gatekeepers to open the gate, they're also very well dressed in very great finery. So this poor villager has come from a distant place, sees one person dressed, immaculately dressed and very impressive, and the farmer thinks, this villager thinks, oh, this must be the king, and he's about to bow down to him. And then this person says, oh, no, I'm not the king, I'm just at the gate. And he opens the door. So then this villager goes inside. And there he finds another person, even better dressed and more impressive. He said, oh, this must be the king. And he bows down before him. And the person says, oh, no, I'm not the king. I'm here just to open the door. And so this way, several doors are opened. And finally, when he stands before the king himself, then there is no doubt in his mind. He knows he's there in the presence. So that's essentially what happens when we try to go inward. In beginning, we'll say, oh, this is me. And then we look deeply and say, oh, no, this is not me. I need to go deep inside. Then we find the mind, the intellect, and so on. And then ultimately, when we stand in the presence of the true self, which is who we really are, then there is no question. There is nobody to question, because there's no more an object there. You are there in yourself. It's like you cannot ask any questions when you're fast asleep. There is nobody to whom you can ask. You don't, first of all, have any instruments to even vocalize your question, and there is nobody to ask a question to. There is all one. So now what does all this discussion about knowledge, where is it all supposed to lead us? One thing we have seen the classification of knowledge into direct and indirect, and into objective and subjective. We have seen that no amount of indirect, objective knowledge can bring us total fulfillment. That complete fulfillment can come to us only through a direct knowledge which does not depend on the mind and the senses, and a knowledge which is not of the object but of the subject. So as spiritual seekers, what we seek is the spirit, the source of infinite fulfillment. In other words, what we seek is the knowledge of the subject, the Atman, the real self, and not the object, which are infinite. But in our daily lives, what we're really dealing with are objects all the time. How many of us can remain immersed in the thought of the subject all the time? Now, those who are able to always remain immersed in that real self. So the word that is in Sanskrit often used is called Atma Rama, the one who's immersed in the bliss of the self. In fact, that was also the term Swami Vivekananda used sometimes to refer to Ramakrishna. That's also the word used in the Gita and the Upanishads. You'll find this often, that those who are immersed in the Atman, those who are just playing with the Atman, so to speak, who are just immersed in the Atman. That's the word, Atma Rama, Atma Ratihi. That's the word that comes in the Gita and the Upanishads. So what can we do, since our present life deals with objects and objective knowledge? What can we do to reach that state of always remaining immersed in the knowledge of the subject? We must find a way to connect our objective knowledge to our subjective knowledge. Now that is what the Gita suggests in chapter 3, verse 28. That's the chapter we just finished studying in our Wednesday class. There is this one beautiful verse, verse 28. It says, Guna Guneshu Vartante, which means that the more we are able to recognize that everything that is happening in the world around, all the acquisition of objective knowledge, all the actions that we are engaged in daily from the time we wake up till the time we sleep, is really some material particles interacting with some other material particles. And the example that I have often given in the past is for instance, now the act of reading. I say, I read this and I get knowledge. But what is exactly happening here? And if you look, kind of go to the break down this idea of knowledge or action, essentially, my hands are holding this paper and my eyes are reading what's there. So the paper is made up of material particles. This, which I call hand, is also a material entity. We know what happens after death. So this is some material entity holding some material entity, being read through eyes, the information going through the brain and everything. So it's just particles of matter in different configuration are interacting with each other. And out of this transfer of information, knowledge comes. So there is somebody witnessing this whole phenomenon. Now I am that witness who is just seeing, and yet I feel I am lifting this paper, I am doing this. So to remain aware all the time that all activities in the world are really some particles of matter which I identify as belonging to the world, and some particles of matter which I mistakenly think it's me, are essentially interacting with each other, while I am the real witness. So now, that can be quite tough. It's kind of intellectually stimulating to think about it this way, but not many, in fact, very few can keep this awareness all the time. So an easier way, at least in the initial stages of our spiritual life, is to then have what I sometimes call a divine identity. Rather than trying to have the identity, I am the spirit, birthless, deathless, eternal, and so on. And it might be too abstract, or it's maybe an identity with which we may not be able to connect right away. And so an intermediate step to that is to cultivate what we sometimes call a divine identity, which is a step away from this subjective identity, the identity of the spirit. In this divine identity, we are still dealing with objects. We're still dealing with people, but objects and people which are connected with our spiritual ideal in some way. So by a divine identity, I mean the identity associated with God, associated with our spiritual ideal. Or the ideal, what sometimes in Sanskrit we call Ishta, the chosen form or aspect of the divine on whom we meditate, to whom we pray. So it usually takes the form of some kind of a relationship with that ideal. Either we see that ideal as our master, so I'm a servant of God, or I'm a child of God, God as the father, God as the mother, and so on. And we have complete freedom in relating ourselves to the divine in whichever form that comes most naturally to us. So every thought we think, every word we speak, every action we do is done out of love for God. Now, that love for God, which fills, if we are able to do that, let me put it this way. It's almost like I said everything gets filtered through the mind and the senses. So this is in some way adding one more filter to it. The filter of God, or filter of my connection with God. So everything that comes in through the senses and through the mind, because it is getting filtered in some way through my connection with the divine, everything that I see, think and do gets associated with divine. That association with the divine, one of the most ancient of Upanishads called the Isha Upanishad, really begins with this, that Isha Vasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat, that whatever we see in this world, whatever we perceive in this world, whatever or whoever we deal with in this world, the Upanishad says, cover it with the light of the divine. So when every thought, every action, every word is filled with God's light, then the objective knowledge, it's still objective, it's still knowledge of the objects, but it becomes progressively less and less material and more spiritual. And that's how our daily life can get more spiritualized. The division of life then into spiritual and secular is eliminated. The light of God gradually matures in the relationship with the divine into union with the divine. We see that the more intense and intimate any love becomes, then it brings the two entities who are connected with love together. And so the intense form of love with God would then not keep God separate from me. Sometimes, interestingly, we see that as little babies, you see, when we grow up a little bit, we are able to use our mind and intellect, and we know that there are other ways of knowing. But for little children, the only way to know something is to eat it. You see, sometimes you just leave children on the ground and whatever is there, there isn't that at that age thing like, oh, just lift it up and appreciate its color or beauty or things like that. They think they just put it in the mouth. And then you just become one with it. There is this, wasn't there I think he probably passed away. Maurice Sendak was one of the great artists. So he's done a lot of children's illustrations and books. And he used to get letters from children all over the world appreciating, and they were great fans of his. And he said that he will try his best to personally answer all the letters he got from children. And so he said one letter he got was so sweet. So he said he took his time and not only replied to that letter, but also did a small picture, a kind of an illustration, and sent it to the boy. Now think about it. A Maurice Sendak picture done by him, it's an original, not a duplicate, which would, well, it's valuable in its own right, but even if you want to put value in terms of money, it's very expensive also. Anyway, so he sent it off to that boy, and then after a few days, he received a letter from the boy's mother, and saying that whatever the name of the boy was, he says, my child was so happy to get your letter. He was so thrilled that he ate it. That great painting that he sent, he just ate it. So knowledge, somehow I think probably instinctively we realize when we are children, knowledge means becoming one with it. And then of course when we grow up, and then everything becomes just too cerebral. But then we need to go back to that original innocence and spontaneity of childhood, and then we realize that the culmination of knowledge comes in being one. So knowing God is being God. There is this very, very well-known passage in the Vedas which says, Brahmavit Brahmaiva Bhavati. The knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. So when can we say that I truly know the divine? Not simply when the divine remains an object of my knowledge. Not simply when we can theorize about it. Not simply when we read a lot of books about it. Not simply when we can write books about it or give lectures on the divine. But when we become one with the divine. When there is no wall separating us from the divine. It is then that total fulfillment comes to us. We become one with knowledge. Sri Ramakrishna used to give the example of a salt doll which went to measure the depth of the ocean. And he said, no sooner it went, it got melted. So acquiring knowledge in this way is a skill, is an art. And hence, every spiritual seeker is in some way a real artist. The song that we did in the beginning, it's very, very, very appropriate when he says, Maya must not claim us, Maya must not bind us. Now Maya, all knowledge of the objects, all objective knowledge is Maya. And if my whole life remains centered only in the objects, I'm already bound by Maya. Maya has already claimed me. But if that knowledge of the object makes me turn inward toward the subject, it's then that I can break the net of Maya. It's then that I can get out of the clutches of Maya. The way to do it is to acquire skill in acquiring knowledge, is to practice knowledge as an art. Now, this way of practicing knowledge requires hard work, it requires perseverance, and it requires single-minded focus. Now, those who have these qualities, the determination to work hard, perseverance no matter how much time it takes, no matter how often we fail, and a single-minded attention. If we are able to do it, we will see that when these qualities are combined, we will experience success in spiritual life. So let us make effort. I hope and pray that through the grace of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, our effort at acquiring knowledge become a real art, a real skill through which we are able to not allow Maya to claim us all the time, so that we can become free and experience real fulfillment in life. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. We bow down to Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother again and again. So we have a lot of programs coming up this week. On Wednesday, we will have the usual Gita class at 7:30, the Vedanta study group. On Tuesday, we'll have the Arati and meditation as usual. Tomorrow, Monday evening, we have a special program at the Divinity School. There is that building called the Center for the Study of World Religions. Tomorrow evening at 5:15, it says prayer as music. So there will be a devotional and classical Indian music with some reflection both before and after the program. You'll find the details on the board outside. So I'll encourage you, especially those who live in that area, to come. That's tomorrow, 5:15, at the Center for the Study of World Religions in Cambridge. Then another one program also you will see on the board outside. There is a special, instead of the Saturday meditation that we have a special musical concert here done by Dattatreya Velankar, one of the very well-known and upcoming Hindustani classical music. So he'll do some devotional singing and classical music. That will be on next Saturday at 6 o'clock here at the Vedanta Society. One other change in the program is next Sunday, I was to speak on the power of ignorance. So we'll postpone that a little bit. And we have a visiting Swami, a guest speaker from the Vedanta Society in Southern California. His name is Swami Tyagananda, one of the senior Swamis of the order. He'll be with us that weekend, and he will speak on celebrating Vivekananda. And his presentation will include almost half an hour of a slideshow. He's coming from Hollywood, after all, you can see. So that'll be interesting. So you're all welcome for this lot of programs this week, and we'll conclude with a prayer now. Let's pray. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the all-loving being become manifest unto us. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May the Divine bless us all and fill our hearts with infinite grace and love. Peace, peace, peace be unto